Okay, testing the sound level.
Yeah, I leave this one here. David, let's go and get some food.
How are you? You were Spanish like that?
She's going to set up shoes.
I will give you a card for every key you get back.
Did you need any help? Hello, it's a bit early. Hey, I'm cool. Yeah, of course. Yeah, wonderfully well.
I'm not into the afternoon.
Okay, well done. Is that mental?
Yes, so the application is going to be October 2020.
Yeah.
Only a question of sexual assault. And Nicola Douglas, so I'm in Oxford, and she's in Wednesday. If she's ever in Oxford, I'll take her. That's probably the easiest thing. And then she'll
She's just for Thanks so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Just, don't worry. Don't worry. There's the family. Friends on the plane. This is my son, Shay, my daughter Lydia, my younger son Caleb, and my wife and future students. We'll just drop our bags here. And then is there anything I should know? I mean, I'm gonna be in here at 3.
So what I'm just going to confine people.
Sorry.
So can I just say,
Yeah.
what I will do, you'll go to the second section. So I'll call these 3 people up, when this song starts.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask you a question, so you want to share.
Sure.
And I'll just do this.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
All right, just want to say.
I'll just do whatever you tell me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Pardon me.
So if it's expecting you into this kind of.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? What you see to Okay, so after the last one, yes. So what I put you out, okay. Okay. So, all right, so that's, I'll get you to go and sit up here, just do one at a time. So I'll ask us, that's even better. I'm so looking forward to sitting down and talking about some point, because I'm so proud of you. I met a friend of yours twice. Yes, I met her at Women in Theatre Association conference, so I helped her because when she did her PhD. I just wanted to find her so much. She's just such an amazing woman. So
Okay, yes. He said it was a quicker, so I could get myself, yes. It's gonna get to go up there, that's okay. If you show us, then you can go ahead. All right. We're just gonna have this up for six, right? Yeah, I think it'll be okay. Great. Should I sit up here or should I? That's okay.
So the meeting is already changed, so she will be.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's relevant.
Yes. Yes.
My house is fine. It is. It is. What kind of coffee? There's a lot of great people.
Yes. Yes. Right, so she's.
So I'm good. Yeah, see you. Yeah.
So I'm not through, so.
Okay.
Takes care of it.
Go ahead.
Everything like that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, they are still people. Okay, this one. I think it's 2:50. Yes, I do.
Very nice.
Yes, very nice. Tasty.
All right.
She's a little musician now. So very good right now. So I
But I can see, I need to. Keep this much.
Well, I did, but it also just.
You're very good here.
Are you going, not coming back or?
Yes.
Oh, bless you. Please.
Yes, yes.
Really?
What time?
They said
I,
two.
Yes, I did. It's all good. I just don't, sorry. I think we're okay. Thank you. With 90 slides. Test, test. Testing, testing, testing. Can you hear me okay? Oh, there it is. Testing, testing. All good. I'm okay. Good. Hi, testing, testing, testing. Does it work okay? Is it all good? Testing, testing. Perfect, thank you.
On the whole, the global Christian community is sadly failing to realize its potential contribution to fighting corruption. This subject is rarely addressed in Christian teaching. Church leaders may be benefiting from corrupt practices. The behavior of Christians at all levels of society often reflects prevailing norms rather than Christian ethics. And only a very small proportion of Christian NGOs are engaged in advocacy for better governance. However, the Church can help control corruption, but only if it does three essential things. First, we need to model values of fairness and honesty in our leadership roles and our social interactions. Second, we need to promote a socially engaged theology that emphasizes both justice and integrity. And third, we need to build sustainable collective action against corruption norms and structures in our societies.
I think one of the most pressing needs is the way that we use majority world ministers, leaders, and academia. We're quite selective. And I think sometimes the Western Church determines what they want from the majority world instead of allowing us to explore different aspects and different ways that church and mission can work together. The other thing I think is that we often look for strategies and templates for mission. And I think this kind of restricts the kind of thing that God wants to do. I think it's more relational and less dependent on strategies, networks, and projects.
It participates in God's mission is to purify the gospel truth of salvation based on 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2, namely Jesus Christ and Him crucified, without adulteration of prosperity theology and legalism. The second is the transformation of Christian daily lives that are based on the pure gospel truth. Accordingly, the church, while preaching the gospel and sharing the testimony, can stand firm and stay away from falling into Christless and/or Confucianist Christianity.
In my country, Ethiopia, in continent Africa, the challenges of the churches are more inward-looking, lack of indigenous missional mindset, academic rigorous in academic institutions. On top of this, thinking and preparing responsibly for the rest of the world to accomplish the main task, which is the mission of God, also one of the challenges before us. So OCMS could help and influence by extending its branch or ministry philosophy to where the real challenges are in order to promote rigorous academic research to address the contemporary challenges of the church era.
On the whole, the global Christian community is sadly failing to realize its potential contribution to fighting corruption. This subject is rarely addressed in Christian teaching. Church leaders may be benefiting from corrupt practices. The behavior of Christians at all levels of society often reflects prevailing norms rather than Christian ethics. And only a very small proportion of Christian NGOs are engaged in advocacy for better governance. However, the Church can help control corruption, but only if it does three essential things. First, we need to model values of fairness and honesty in our leadership roles and our social interactions. Second, we need to promote a socially engaged theology that emphasizes both justice and integrity. And third, we need to build sustainable collective action against corruption norms and structures in our societies.
I think one of the most pressing needs is the way that we use majority world ministers, leaders in academia. We're quite selective. And I think sometimes the Western church determines what they want from the majority world instead of allowing us to explore different aspects and different ways that church and mission can work together. The other thing I think is that we often look for strategies and templates for mission. And I think this kind of restricts the kind of thing that God wants to do. I think it's more relational and less dependent on strategies, networks, and projects.
It participates in God's mission is to purify the gospel truth of salvation based on 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2, namely Jesus Christ and Him crucified, without adulteration of prosperity theology and legalism. The second is the transformation of Christian daily lives that are based on the pure gospel truth. Accordingly, the church, while preaching the gospel and sharing the testimony, can stand firm and stay away from falling into Christless and or Confucianist Christianity.
In my country, Ethiopia, and continent Africa, the challenges of the churches are more inward-looking: lack of indigenous missional mindset, academic rigorous in academic institutions. On top of this, thinking and preparing responsibly for the rest of the world to accomplish the main task, which is the mission of God, also one of the challenges before us. So OCMS could help and influence by extending its branch or ministry philosophy to where the real challenges are in order to promote rigorous academic research to address the contemporary challenges of the church era.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start, so those of you who are still standing and coming in, can you please take your seat? I'll go. Good afternoon again. So this afternoon we have a speaker. Our speaker who's come all the way from the United States. She is Dr. Gina Zerlo. She's an American historian, sociologist, and a scholar of history of mission and world Christianity. She is a visiting research fellow at Boston University Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs. She co-founded and also is the co-director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, based in Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, South Hamilton, Massachusetts. She was named in the BBC one of the 100 most inspiring and influential women from around the world in 2019 for her work in religious statistics and female future of religion. So it's our privilege to have such an accomplished person. She's studied for her PhD in history and hermeneutics at Boston University School of Theology under the direction of Dana Robert and graduated in 2017. Her dissertation was focused on the role of quantification in the development of world Christianity, with special focus on the work of an Anglican missionary to Kenya, David B. Barrett. Her recent book includes Global Christianity, a guide to the world's largest religion, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, and also Women in World Christianity, Building and Sustaining a Global Movement. So with that short introduction, I'm sure there are a whole lot of good things to say about her, all the books she's published, all the papers she's written. But we'll end with that, and I will invite her now for her presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. No post-lunch napping. Everyone is awake. You all had coffee. Everyone's good. I'm energized. I have 90 slides and 30 minutes. I'm half joking. We're going to cover 150 years of global Christian trends in this time together. I have some of these cards out scattered in the audience if you want to stay in touch with my research center, the Center for the Study of Global Christianity. You can scan this QR code, get access to everything we are producing. I'd love to stay in touch. So what we're going to do this afternoon is a little bit of history, global Christian trends, and then we're going to end with some of my findings on women and world Christianity. So the Research Center was founded by an Anglican missionary to Kenya, David B. Barrett, who arrived in Nyanza province in 1957 when African Christianity was growing by leaps and bounds. And David Barrett was an aeronautical engineer turned Anglican missionary priest. And so when he got to Africa and Christianity was growing like crazy, what did he do? He started to count. He counted Christians in Kenya, in East Africa, and then expanded his analysis to the entire world. He founded the unit of research of the Church of the Province of East Africa. This is not clicking anymore. There it is, in 1965. So this is the first iteration of what is now the Center for the Study of Global Christianity. He traveled to 212 countries between the 1960s and the 1970s. There was only 223 countries at the time. So he traveled to almost every country in the world looking for the best available data on Christian and other religion affiliation. So he found that most previously published works just weren't that good. So he had to go in person, talk to Christians, and he would go into villages and he would ask, let me talk to the oldest Christian in this village and get the history of Christianity in this area. In 1970, he projected his figures that there would be 350 million Christians in Africa by the year 2000. And this was the time when most Western sociologists were saying religion is dead, God is dead. Peter Berger famously said that by the year 2000, religious people would just be huddled in tiny sects together, trying to resist a worldwide secular culture. But this missionary in Kenya was saying, well, from Africa, the situation looks a lot different. Turns out Barrett was right, Berger was wrong. And Berger famously recanted his position and then started a research center for us at Boston University. So it came full circle in the end. Here's a picture of David Barrett giving a copy of the first edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia to Pope John Paul II. All of his research came together in the World Christian Encyclopedia, which was the first time all the world's Christians were together in a single book, with no barriers between them. Catholics, Orthodox, evangelicals, African independent churches, you name it, they were in this book. It was the first global census of both world religions and global Christianity. In 2001, David Barrett joined with my colleague now, Todd Johnson. They produced the second edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia. This is how we mark time at the center, is by big books. That's what we do. And then in 2020, we produced the third edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia, which I recently gave a copy to Pope Francis at the Vatican. And there's a copy right here at the OCMS, which is just delightful. So the OCMS and the CSGC, I consider us sister centers in trying to produce scholarship, try to raise up voices of the Global South, to put out great material from a research perspective all around the world. Here's a snapshot of the World Christian Encyclopedia. I chose Turkmenistan only because it fits nice on a PowerPoint, 2 pages. So you can see a little bit about what we do at the center, which is looking at Christianity in its social, historical, religious context. So we have data from the United Nations about various indicators in the country. You have a list of every religion in the country, brief history, maps, charts, photos, graphs, you name it. If it can be quantified, we have quantified it in some way. I came out with this book in 2022, Global Christianity, A Guide to the World's Largest Religion, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. If you don't want the mother 1,000-page version, you can have the baby version, which is on Amazon, only $25, and paperback. So every country of the world, all the statistics truncated just for you. And here's what that looks like. All right, so let's get into the trends. So this is a very boring line graph in technical statistical terms. So I got a PhD and struggled through statistics to make this line graph for you. So this line graph tells you that in the beginning of the 20th century, in the year 1900, about 1/3 of the world was Christian. And then it tells you that today, about 1/3 of the world is Christian, and that we anticipate by the year 2050, about 1/3 of the world will be Christian. You're thinking, wow, statistics are really exciting. But they are, because what this graph doesn't show is the most massive transformation in global religion that has occurred. So here's a map of global Christianity in the year 1900. So you see by continent, Asia, Africa, Latin America, Oceania, Europe, North America. You can see the size of the circle corresponds to the size of the Christian population on that continent. 82% of all Christians lived in the global north in the year 1900, and only 18% of Christians lived in the global south. Now, don't blink, because we're going to jump 120 years to today. This is what global Christianity looks like today, with only 33% of all Christians living in Europe and North America, and 67% living in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. And if we fast forward to 2050, we think it'll be 77% in the global south. Christianity is shifting demographically, but is it shifting in every other way? No. No. Is theological education shifting? Is mission shifting? Yes, in some ways. Is the money of global Christianity shifting? No. Is the scholarship shifting? There's all these other aspects of Christianity other than just where Christians are. So yes, the demographic shift is happening, but there's lots of other things that aren't shifting at the same time. So here's that shift, 82% north, 33, 18, 67. Now this is not the first time in Christian history that Christianity has shifted. If you look at this bar chart in the upper right, so this is the percent of the world that live in the global north and south from the time of Christ to the present. Christianity was a global south faith for the first 1,000 years of Christian history, right? It wasn't Western. There's a period of Western dominance, and since roughly the 1980s, we've returned in some way from a global north-south perspective to the demographic makeup of what Christianity was at the time of Christ for its first 1,000 years. So we can say that Christianity was a white religion, but now it is global. Most definitively, it is a global religion. So here's what world Christianity looks like today. So this is a map by province of the percent Christian. So the darker the blue, the higher concentration of Christians. The lighter the blue, the lower concentration of Christians. And I will stop to say, because someone's probably thinking, what do you mean by Christian? Who is a Christian? I am a sociologist. I am not a theologian. I am not a biblical studies scholar. I'm a sociologist. So from my sociological perspective, a Christian is someone who self-identifies as Christian. So I'm not going to make a theological value judgment on anyone's faith or how they practice their faith. If you call yourself a Christian, you're a Christian. So we see very high affiliation rates still in Europe, North America, Latin America, Oceania, Sub-Saharan Africa, a big place of change, but also in other pockets. So you see Northeast India, the Philippines, and you can see certain provinces in China, for example, have a higher concentration of Christians. So let's take a look at global Christianity through the lens of what we call major Christian traditions. So in our taxonomy of Christianity, which is one way we organize the faith, is we have 4 major Christian traditions: Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, and Independents. Surely you've heard of Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants. Independents are Christians who do not self-identify as Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, such as African initiated churches, AICs, and other such churches. We also have 2 movements within the major Christian traditions, which are evangelicals and Pentecostals charismatics. So you can mix and match the 4 and the 2. So you can be an evangelical Protestant, or you can be a Catholic charismatic, or you can be a evangelical charismatic Orthodox. Mix and match. That's how the taxonomy works. So this is a map of global Christianity by major Christian traditions. So you can see the flavor of Christianity that exists all over the world, because this is an ecumenical project. So you can see in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of Europe, many states in the US is that pink Catholic color, majority Catholic. Independents, a lot India and China, the world's 2 largest countries. Most Christians there are in the independent category. Orthodox is mainly in Eastern Europe, but also, of course, Ethiopia and Egypt. And then the green, kind of scattered all throughout the world, are Protestants. Because I'm American, one of my favorite pieces of this graph is the state of Texas in the USA, which of course must be independent. If you know anything about Texas, it must be independent. And the data indeed show that. So 49% of all Christians in the world are Catholics. So Catholics are the largest major Christian tradition. Protestants make up 23% of all Christians, Independents 16%, and Orthodox 12%. So this is the big picture of Christianity. So let's take a look at each of these. We're going quick because we're going to go around the world a few times in this 30 minutes. So let's take a look at each major Christian tradition and movement and see some of their trends over this period. So here's a map of global Catholicism. And I think when you say Catholic, a lot of people don't think African. But when you look at the map, a lot of sub-Saharan Africa is Catholic. A different kind of Catholic than maybe you get in Italy or France, but still Catholic. And of course, Latin America, Western Europe, still very Catholic. But you can see that bar chart at the top, that Catholicism was majority global north for most of its history, Europe, but now look at it. Global Catholicism is not a Western faith either anymore. It is Southern. It's a global South faith. Here are Protestants. Another piece that I love about those over time graphs at the top is you can see the relative youth of some of these Christian families. So Catholics, very old. Protestants are like babies, or maybe like teenagers in comparison. So Protestants only came on the scene in a particular time in history. They were a majority global north, but again, global south. 44% of all Protestants in the world are African. Global Protestantism is an African faith. The exception to the north-south thing are the Orthodox. So the Orthodox have a very different history in the 20th century compared to every other Christian community because of persecution. So actually, global Orthodoxy has historically always been global South, but today is global North because of being truncated into the Eastern Europe region. So we have a different trajectory for Orthodox. You can see Russia and other Eastern European countries. Here are independents, which are even younger than Protestants. And independents are found all around the world. Brazil is a major player, the United States, with a lot of these independent charismatic movements, these loosely networked churches that really don't belong to any formal denomination, but are Christian. So think third wave charismatics, think African independent churches. Even Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses fall in the independent category because they self-identify as Christian. So they are included in the statistics here. Again, majority global South. Evangelicals are found, again, all over the world. USA, Brazil are very important players in the evangelical movement. You can see South Korea also highlighted there. And most evangelicals today also live in the global South. And I'd just like to make a note, again, as an American, that the debates of American evangelicalism do not dictate the debates of global evangelicalism, even though the USA is the country with the most evangelicals. So this is a tension that exists in global Christianity of how to work this out. And lastly, we have Pentecostals, charismatics, which have always been a majority global South faith. Wherever Christianity grew in the 20th century, Pentecostals, charismatics grew with them. The future of global Christianity is Pentecostal charismatic. Okay, the next level down in the taxonomy, who knew taxonomies could be so much fun? I did, is Christian families. So what we've done here is we've put together denominations into recognizable names that most people would know. Okay, so for example, Anglicans, non-denominational, Baptists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Adventists, these are what people normally call denominations. We call global Christian families. And when you look at the trends of families over time, a really interesting picture emerges of the future of global Christianity. I know this is hard to see from here, so I'll explain it. This has all of the families at the bottom and their growth rates from 1970 to 2020. And any population in the world, not just religious, any population needs to grow at 2% per year in order to actually grow. Okay, so if your church or your denomination is growing less than 2%, it means it's not keeping up with population growth. So this line here, this is great. Sorry, I won't do that again. So there's 2% there. You see 0, 2. You see all those bars that are under 2? Oh, sorry, I am going to do it again. I won't do that again. Okay. Most of these families are under 2%. And which families are these? They're the traditional Western denominations who are under 2%. So, for example, we have Congregational, Christian Brethren, Catholics, and Reformed Presbyterian, Orthodox, Lutheran, Baptist, Anglican, Eastern Orthodox, I can go on and on, all under 2%. Okay, what are those ones that are above 2%? What's that huge bar in the middle? Non-traditional, house churches, and cell churches. Churches that Western Christianity calls untraditional, non-traditional, other forms of Christianity, house churches, cell movements. That's where the growth of Christianity has been. And in my travels and talking to people all around the world, I have gotten the sense that the Western missionary sending organizations are not talking to the people in that big bar there. There's a huge divide between what's happening in the Western missionary movement and the essentially underground house cell movement, which appears to be the future of world Christianity. So to me, this is an indication of where the trends are going and should give us some pause to think clearly about this tension that exists in world Christianity. Okay, let's take a trip around the world by continent. And I should say all the photos that you see in this presentation are actual Christians from around the world, not just stock photos. So this is the living, breathing aspect of global Christianity. These are real Christians who live in these places around the world. Okay, here is Africa. So that map in the corner is the percent Christian by country using modern boundaries of Africa in the beginning of the 20th century. And you can see the tremendous change today. So most of sub-Saharan Africa is Christian. You can see the line where Islam in the north meets Christianity in the south that cuts across the Sahel there. So we have a lot of growth of Christianity in Africa. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, right in the middle, was 4% Christian in 1900 and is 95% Christian today. But the Democratic Republic of the Congo was also named the rape capital of the world in 2010. So we have some problems. Let's take a look at Asia. Asia is always fun because it's so colorful. So here's a graph of all the religions of Asia. So to be Christian in Asia is to naturally live in religious diversity. So Islam, 27% of the population, Hinduism, 23%, Buddhist, agnostic, Chinese folk religion. Then we get to Christians, which are 8% of Asia's population, which does not seem like a lot, but when you have the world's two largest countries, China and India, the percent is a lot. But it has grown from 2% to 8%. And I will say the future of world Christianity also depends on Asia because of China and India from a demographic perspective. Moving on to Europe. Here is the percent of the population in Europe that is Christian, and you can see this decline trajectory with a little bit of bump after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, where Christianity in Eastern Europe in many countries began to revive. The trajectory does appear to be going down in Europe. And again, I will say this is affiliation. So this is people in Europe who self-identify as Christians. If this was a map of church or a graph of church attendance in Europe, it would not be here, it would be here. If it were a graph of belief in God, it would not be here, it would be here. Okay, so this is only showing one variable. But I don't want you to get the sense that the whole story of Christianity in Europe is one of decline, because it's not. Migrant churches, ethnic minority churches are growing on the continent. So there is a lot of nuance and complexity going on here as well. Latin America. So the story of Christianity in Latin America in the 20th century has been the growth of the Pentecostal charismatic Protestant movement, where most Christians at the beginning of the 20th century were largely Catholic, but today only 80% of Christians in Latin America are Catholic and 20% fall in that evangelicals category, Protestants, Pentecostals, charismatics. One of the big questions people were asking for a while is Latin America turning Protestant? No. There's a lot of vibrant Catholic work going on there. The Catholic charismatic movement is huge in Latin America, partially as a response to the arrival of Protestantism in the continent. A lot of people said with the arrival of this other religion, really, we are not going to convert, we're going to be more ardently Catholic and more faithful in our Catholic tradition. So that's part of the story of Latin American Catholicism. North America, most people think churches in North America look like this. They don't. Mine certainly doesn't. So again, we have a similar trajectory to what's happening in Europe, of one of decline, especially in Canada, but also in the USA. And then, of course, North America is becoming more religiously diverse, with larger populations of Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists coming into both Canada and the USA. The last continent here is Oceania, which includes both Australia, New Zealand, and all of the Pacific Islands. Every single global Christianity talk I give, I talk about the Pacific Islands. You want to talk about climate change? You're going to talk about the Pacific Islands, because people in the Pacific Islands most acutely feel the effects of climate change for things they did not do. It's from what industrialized large nations have done are impacting Pacific Island nations, all of which are majority Christian, by the way. So you want to look for eco-theology and eco-womanist theology and how to respond to the climate crisis, you're going to look at the Pacific Islands. But also, the demographic trajectory has been different because Australia and New Zealand, as the two largest countries in the region, have become much more secularized. And they received Christianity somewhat late, compared to other Western nations, and they've also shedded it a lot earlier and a lot quicker. So the percent Christian of Australia and New Zealand is going down, while that in Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, you can see from 1900 to 2020 has jumped, especially in Melanesia, the largest country of which is Papua New Guinea, which had a huge change in its Christian affiliation. The last region I will mention is the Middle East. Never forget the Middle East. The Middle East has had its Christian population drop dramatically from nearly 13% in 1900 to about 4% today, and it's really hard to know what the future of Christianity is in the Middle East because of the constant pressures Middle Eastern Christians are under, especially Catholics and Orthodox, who are the historic Christian faiths in the region. So we think by 2050 it could be under 3%. This is a tragedy for global Christianity because, as we heard earlier, that an injustice one place is injustice everywhere. Okay, now let's get to women. How am I on time? I actually don't know when I started, so it doesn't matter when I look at what I got. So for the last several years, I've been working on a project on women in world Christianity, and this book is coming out in September, Women in World Christianity, Building and Sustaining a Global Movement. Because I looked around at all these global Christian meetings I was going to, and I thought, why am I one of the few women at these places when everyone is telling me that women make up the majority of the church? Well, where are they? Why am I in a room of 300 Christians and there's 6 women here? What's going on? So I decided to embark on a project to figure it out. And in January 2019, I woke up very eager to read the United Nations Human Development Report, like I'm sure everyone is excited to do. And it said this: nowhere in the world have women attained complete equality with men. Nowhere. Nowhere. And the World Economic Report just came out with the 2023 report a few weeks ago. Same thing. Nowhere. If current progress continues, it will take 202 years for women to be fully equal. Not in my lifetime, not in my daughter's lifetime, and if they have kids, probably not in their lifetime either. Progress on gender equality is slowing as women attain the easier markers of progress. Okay, women are surviving more in childbirth. Great. Women are getting more secondary education. Great. But women are not at the upper echelons of hardly anything. Think of your churches. Think of your mission organizations. Think of all Christian organizations, all the women who are at the bottom and the lack of women at the top. And that exists in almost every industry in the world. Lots of women at the bottom, not very many women at the top. So I set out to find some data because that's what I like to do. And what I found is what I suspected, that Christianity is majority female everywhere in the world. These are actual pictures of actual Christian women all around the world. But the data were really unsatisfying. Let me share it with you. So on every continent, church affiliation is more female than the general population. And I have the data here. So Europe, for example, the European population is 52% female. The European Christians are 53% female. This is what we call not statistically significant. Right? So I spent years trying to find data, and this is what I get. It's very disappointing, very uninteresting, but hang tight, it gets more interesting. Generally, the countries with the most Christians, so those are the top 10 countries with the most Christians in the world, report higher percent Christian female than the general population, but again, by very slim margins. So the Brazilian population is 51% female, but the Brazilian census says Christianity is 52% female. Okay, it'll get more interesting. The countries with the highest percent Christian female are all over the world. So those are the top 10 countries with the highest percent Christian female. And Mongolia, Israel, and Estonia all reported 63%. Now, I was still really unsatisfied with all of these data. And the reason is because there is a chronic lack of data on gender in world Christianity. So when I started this project, I had just come off of 5 years of researching for the World Christian Encyclopedia, which means I was looking at data and trends and talking to people in literally every country of the world. No exaggeration. I've emailed a Christian in every country in the world. And I thought, I'll just go back to all the data that I collected and reanalyze it through a gender lens. But when I went back to those data, there was no gender lens with which to analyze it. And either churches are not collecting data on gender, or they are collecting it and they're not reporting it. And I think it's both. And I think the latter, I think they're both egregious, but the latter feels more egregious, to know and not tell. So the Catholic Church has one of the most rigorous statistical traditions in the world. They release these books every single year. You can find anything quantified about the Roman Catholic Church in these 2 books, but it will not tell you what percent female the global Catholic Church is. That seems like a massive oversight if they're not asking the question. And so that's why I had to just go to country census data and just try to grab whatever I could possibly find. So I want to nuance those figures that you saw earlier. One of the most common refrains of, for example, African Christianity is that it's majority female. So for all the African specialists in the room, if I tell you African Christianity is 52% female, does that sound right to you? No, everyone knows there would be no African Christianity if it weren't for women, right? They were often the earliest to convert. They were the ones passing the faith on to their children, and they're the most active members, 52%. Nonsense. So what's going on? When you look at more local, ethnographic, qualitative data, the real picture emerges. But this level of data is not available for everywhere in the world. So here are a couple examples. The Catholic Church in Benin. This is a quote from another scholar's work. Women are very active in the church. Women are the majority in church attendance everywhere. Women do everything. Coming to the church, you will find out that the population of women is greater. Women could be about 80%, while men would be something like 20%. 80-20 is a lot different than 52, right? This is what we're taught. This is the women's movement of world Christianity. Here's one from Burkina Faso. This one informant indicated that about 90% of their church members are women. And not only did they make a quantitative statement, they made a qualitative statement, and they are more dynamic than the men. It's not just in Africa. Here's a couple examples from South Korea and China. The Presbyterian Church in Korea Tonghap, the 4th largest denomination, 70% female. It is widely observed that the 20th century Chinese house church movement would not exist without women. And at one point, its leaders were 75% female. Okay, so this is the real women and world Christianity, is this level of detail. And this upcoming academic year, I'll be doing a fellowship at Harvard Divinity School where I'm going to get at this level of detail for as many places as I can possibly find to produce data that really represents the gender dynamics that exist in world Christianity and really show how it is a women's movement. So I did this big overview, but I also did a survey. And in the survey, I wanted to know what women were doing in churches. Because I think I had a hunch that they were doing pretty much everything, but I wanted some data to get at that a little more. Usually hunches don't get peer reviewed very well. So what are women doing in churches? So I administered a survey and I asked about many different kinds of positions in churches. So I will read some of them to you. So I asked, how do you think the chances of men and women compare when it comes to getting a certain role or a certain job in a church? And I asked about senior pastor, associate pastor, deacon, administrative assistant, elder, overseer, financial secretary, evangelist, youth pastor, children's Sunday school teacher, adult Bible teacher, family pastor, worship leader, janitor, board member, intercessor, and small group leader. So what you see here is the blue is people thought men had a better chance of getting that position, and the orange, people thought women had a better chance of getting that position. And the green is they thought they had an equal chance. And at first glance, I was actually kind of encouraged by this. There was a lot more green on this graph than I thought there would be. Okay, so for the most part, for most positions, other than obviously senior pastor, women have a 0% chance apparently, men and women have a nearly equal chance for most positions. I thought, that's kind of nice. But then I asked the question, who actually holds these positions in your church? And this is where the gender dynamics of church life are on full display. So the only positions, this is the global data, where women were more prominent than men were administrative assistant, children's Sunday school teacher, and intercessor. Women run stuff, teach children, and pray. Is this all that women do? Is this all that women are worth? Is a question I want to know. If you look at the data by continent, so in Latin America, for example, the only position that was majority female was children's Sunday school teacher. Let's end with some wisdom from women. Here's Elsa Tamez from Mexico. Women must vehemently reclaim and affirm their right to be considered created in the image and likeness of God. For Christians, that is the starting point. Here's Philomena Mwara from Kenya. The church in Africa has a feminine face and owes much of its tremendous growth to the agency of women. Agency is an active word, not a passive word. Emmeline Dekoikoi from the Philippines. The main concern of women is not merely a demand for more positions and equal opportunity in decision-making bodies of the church. It is more than that. It is a struggle to recognize women's theological and spiritual contribution as an integral part of the church's prophetic ministry in the world. Integral, not marginal. And our last one from Emi Francis O of Fiji. The goal is not reverse discrimination, women dominating men, but a new heaven and a new earth taking hold with no one being dominated or subordinated, each participating according to their genuine gifts and mutuality. This is what women in world Christianity are looking for. So hopefully a year from now, I'll have some brand new data and statistics. I can come back and we can do it all again. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me, follow our center, and I'm happy to open it up for questions now. Okay. Is that a half an hour? All right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, and it is indeed illuminating to have this report on the intriguing research which gave us instrument or tools to study Christianity as a global movement. And it's been very interesting, I would say, and I think no one took their afternoon nap.
All right.
So now we'll open the floor for comments, questions. Yes, I see one there. Please be brief because I can see other hands as well.
First of all, thank you for keeping us all awake.
All right.
A quick question about, does this data apply to insider movement Christ followers as well? Because that's a significant number, that's subterranean.
Yes, so I'm actually working on an article now about women and insider movements, because a lot of insider movements are led by women, but we see historically in church history, when movements institutionalize, women lose all those opportunities. So I'm trying to draw attention to that reality. And the data do include insider movements. So that whole, quote, non-traditional house cell movement, that includes insider movements. But as I think most people know, the quantifying of insider movements is pretty controversial, but we're doing our best. Yeah, the back.
Yeah, thank you for your thorough research. It was very comprehensive, but I like the later research about the women, because you include the local and indigenous people's voices, and through the qualitative research. I just want to comment for the first quantitative data and the collection, because I read your articles annually you have been issuing. First, about the Global South, I just want to know that, like, how, in what ways you divide the Global South and Global North, because when we think about the North Hemisphere, South Korea, you called Global South. But when we talked about our Korean scholars, we feel like, oh no, we are Global North. Who said the Global South? So, and then Australia is located in the Global South, but I don't think it's our category is like more like Western. So I'm saying like a Global South and North is maybe like coming from the 1980s, David Barrett, because I saw that the first editions, you see that from the globe, the top to the bottom, like it was actually divided by the affluency. So if that's the criteria, how we divide it as our prosperity or affluency, then I don't want to be like a Global South and Global North. That's my point. And the second thing is, when we talked about a charismatic movement, it's actually growing so fast. But when I heard from the local indigenous peoples, like ministers from Sri Lanka, and they say that maybe the charismatic movement is really increasing, but at some point, Sri Lanka, there are many of charismatic movements, including some cults and heretics. So is there any kind of point that you actually distinguish those, the real genuine Christians and the other, the cults and other heretic groups? That's the question. Thank you.
Great. Yes, good question. So the geographical makeup of the world, north and south, that's from the United Nations. So all of our population data comes from the United Nations. I'm not going to decide the size of the Indian population or any other country. That's not my job. My job is to say what religion everyone is in India. So we get all of our data, and then the geographic markers of the continents, global north, south, the 22 regions, that all comes from United Nations. So I know North and South have problems, but you can take it up with the UN. In the first edition of the encyclopedia, Barrett actually used first world, second world, third world. So I think North-South is a better characteristic than that. So North-South is not based on economics. So you have to look at the UN for that. And then the question about charismatic movements and cults. So again, I'm not a theologian. So if a movement calls itself Christian, I'm going to include it as Christian. Whether or not I agree personally or anyone else agrees personally with the theology of a particular group, if they call themselves Christians, they get included. And that's just because I'm a social scientist. So we can ask the theologians who's really in and really out, but that is not a question that I feel equipped to answer. But I do recognize that there's a lot of theological diversity in these groups, and some Christians might not consider parts of them Christian. But again, my independent Baptist church growing up said Catholics weren't Christian. So we could play this game all day long about who's in and who's out of world Christianity. So that's why I prefer the social scientific route.
Well, thank you very much. It was quite awakening. I didn't sleep at all. Now, I was just interested in finding out if you have done this research yourself. The Christian culture, well, before Jesus came, women were treated as dogs or donkeys. During the time of Cicero, that was how Cicero described them, and the Greco-Roman and the Jewish culture treated women that way. Now, Jesus came and changed that, saying, there is no female, there is no male. We are all one in Christ. And I believe this is the value and the culture the church needs to promote. So when you're telling us, and I'm aware of that too, when you're saying that there is no equality in the church, women hold positions which are meant to be held by men. Is it on the basis of the Jesus culture that this is happening? Or what is the dynamics the church apply in order for this to exist? Have you questioned that?
Yeah, great question. So if you look at the historical record, the arrival of Christianity in the first century was good for women. Now, did it give them the same equality as men? No, definitely not. But it did help raise their status quite a lot. And actually, there's very good historical evidence that Christianity survived in the first few centuries because of women. But we also know that the arrival of Christianity in the 19th and 20th century to certain places around the world was actually bad for women. So the arrival of Christianity to some tribes in Africa, it was an assault on the African family. Right? The breaking up with polygamous families and wives being cast out with their children, that wasn't good for women. Now, I'm speaking in broad brush statements here. So I think we need to recognize the fact that the arrival of Christianity was both liberating and oppressive for women. And one of the dynamics we have today is Western theology being exported to places around the world, which is bringing Western gender norms into places where Western gender norms have nothing to do with. So that's a global Christianity tension as well. So I think we need to just be aware of the fact that Christianity is both good and bad for women and use that as a starting point to make sure it actually is good for them. We should not assume it is. Because there's a lot of theology out there that keeps women subordinated to men in very damaging ways. That's just true.
So is this only the theology, or there are also local dynamics?
It's all. It's tradition, it's interpretations of scripture, it's culture that keep gender norms the way that they are. So all of that needs addressing.
Thank you. We have someone there in the back, and then one here in the front. Yes.
So thank you so much. This is just so fabulous. And I want to just acknowledge there are several women in the room here who are true pioneers in their cultures, in their countries, as the first women to pursue a PhD and also to get leadership. And so I just want to acknowledge that those women are here in the room. Thank you. And then I want to ask you, heaven hoping, but maybe about the role of education in those Christian communities, because we are here about advanced theological education. Do you have any data about education levels and opportunities by region, and maybe even theologically related or even doctoral education? I don't know how specific you might be able to go.
Yeah, great question. So
Can I just add?
Yep.
Because I had a similar question adding to that. Like she said, like you are a women scholar and you've got outstanding women, and there are some excellent and accomplished women in this room. So I also would like to know your opinion about what would you say is the future role of women researchers in the mission of the church? Just adding to the question.
Great. Yes, great question. So I have a chapter in the book on women in theological education, and in some ways it was the hardest chapter to write because there is so little data. So little data. Now, the one global data set that does exist on the subject is the World Council of Churches Global Theological Education Survey from 2011-2013, which does have a breakdown by gender, and it shows from certificates to PhDs, the percentage of men and women in each. Now, it's not comprehensive at all, so you have to look at the sample and who's being asked and this and that. But one of the most important findings from that survey was the increase of women in theological education. So we are seeing a trend of women gaining access to theological education, but it varies tremendously by region. And I dug and scraped and asked and did everything I could possibly do to get data by region, and it was almost impossible. So in the book, I have some examples of regions where it's just very, very difficult for women to get education, such as the Middle East. But even like Francophone Africa and a lot of places where women have barely gotten access to secondary education, never mind higher levels of theological education. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But there are more women out there who are theologians, who are producing works. There's the Circle of Concerned Women, African Concerned Women Theologians, producing fantastic theology that everyone should be reading, not just African women. There's Pan Autumn coming out of the Pacific, Asian, and Asian American community. Fantastic scholarship. So I want all of this scholarship from women in the Global South to make its way to here, make its way to the Global North for the benefit of all of world Christianity.
Thank you. We'll just take one more question or comment from here. And I'm sorry we don't have any more time, but you have received all this, I think, some of you. So if you want to contact Gina or have some more conversations after the meeting, please do feel to contact her. She did say that you could contact her.
Yes, this is not my field at all. And as Paul said last night, we have a reputation for being disruptors. Can I ask one or two disrupting questions? What data is there about the integrity of families, the breakdown of marriages, the occurrence of mental health, the influence of women on the well-being and education of children, and reproduction patterns in society? The population of Britain is falling. Were it not for people coming into the country, we wouldn't be able to sustain much of what the country is about. Have you looked at that data with relationship to the other data of women in institutional roles rather than family roles?
I don't think I've looked at that particular cross-tabulation. There is quite a lot of work being done on religion and fertility rates and how fertility rates, which are impacted by women's level of education and other factors, the relationship between religion and fertility, such as Philip Jenkins' book, The Future of Faith, I think it's called. That's a great analysis of this. But in those particular dynamics altogether, I have not looked at, but there is data on all of that. Globally, I don't know. There's definitely more data in Europe and the North America on these things, but there are studies being done to put together those variables. I just have not done them myself.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation and also for those who've made comments. And I'm sure, I hope there will be further discussion, not in this room, but online or through messages or emails. Thank you very much.
Gina, thank you. Wow, fantastic. Well, we are so kind in the way we put this program together. There are just lots of breaks. So it's break time again. And part of the design of this program is you keep moving. So you get up again and you go back out to the marquee. And this time we, I think, have organized the refreshments so you can access them from a few points. We're going to take a 25-minute break and be back here at past. We have one more session together. I think you're going to love it. It's storytelling by our alumni, glimpses from around the world of what God is doing. So quite a different feel from what we've been having the last two sessions. I think you'll find it really inspiring, and there'll be an opportunity within that for you to be praying as well. So come back for that final session of our day before we have a great feast tonight. So back here at 3:30. Thanks ever so much. We're bang on time.